friends, today we will talk about language across the curriculum approach, its basic assumptions, its characteristics and the need for this approach. Let us begin by referring to a very significant quote from the National Curriculum Framework of 2005, which has been extensively quoted in Block 1 of BES 124. It looks at language as a constellation of skills which cut across all school subjects and all disciplines. This document also says that children's mastery over the 4 language skills is the key factor which affects school performance. We all know that most of the times these skills are used together. That is why we should view language education as everybody's responsibility in the school and not just that of the language teacher alone. In line with this belief, this document further says that language education is not confined to the language classroom. A science or social science or even a maths class is ipso facto a language class. Learning the subject means learning the terminology, understanding the concepts and also being able to discuss and write about these terminologies and concepts critically. In other words, language education goes beyond language as a subject and takes place equally in all other subjects, in every learning activity, in fact across the curriculum, whether we are aware of it or not. The important role of language and language education in non-linguistic contexts is not always obvious to either the students or the teachers, but it definitely takes place. Remember that language learning is an indispensable part of subject matter learning. Or to put it differently, subject learning and language learning happen at the same time and each is important for the other. Language plays a very important role in classroom learning. We know that classroom learning is through lectures, answering questions, participating in class discussions, reading and understanding the subject matter. We also have to surf the internet for our assignments and so on. We will talk about it more in a few minutes. So when we talk about the assumptions underlying the language across the curriculum approach, we realize that this approach to learning emphasizes the need to improve command over language in all subjects so that it results in better learning as well as better learning outcomes. Language across the curriculum is not primarily a teaching method or a set of activities, but it is basically a way to describe fundamental principles that some teachers use to teach their subject matter, emphasizing both the content as well as the language of the subject. Further, language across the curriculum also describes how all of us learn and excel in different subjects. Language across the curriculum can be nurtured or hindered through different methods and activities. But even the best of methods will be shallow and rigid if the teacher does not believe in and actively understand this approach to thinking and learning. All this implies that to encourage language across the curriculum, methods and activities would include anything students do and anything teachers design that brings into the learning process as much language use as possible. Language use like talking, writing, listening to and responding and even reading. The approach also requires teachers to creatively exploit anything that children want to talk and write about as learning opportunities. If we accept this definition, a language across the curriculum attitude assumes restructuring the curriculum away from what is known as merely covering the syllabus and moving towards creating opportunities for learning through discussions, classroom conversations, games, also activities like in-class writing projects. Obviously, we can imagine that conversations and discussions and so on will invariably result in increased group activities and maybe noise in the classroom. So, another assumption of the LAC approach is the willingness of teachers and even principals to let the learning move in an unpredicted direction, at least within the broad limits of the school curriculum. We must remember that language is first and foremost our best tool for trying to understand the world, to comprehend the world around us. Only secondarily is it a tool for communication. Having said that, LAC approach looks at talking and listening as a natural phenomenon, since usually children talk and listen right from infancy. So the language across the curriculum describes not only this natural phenomenon, but also the formally designed goals and activities of school curriculum. Language across the curriculum approach is a relatively new perspective on the relationship between language in the language classes as well as language use in non-linguistic subjects. This approach emphasizes that language learning should take place not only in the language classes but also while teaching other subjects. The concept of language across the curriculum began in the United Kingdom in the decade of 1970s and even 1980s, when the Bullock report entitled A Language for Life in 1975 floated the idea of linking language across the curriculum with school language policies. It said, and I quote, "Each school should have an organized policy for language across the curriculum, establishing every teacher's involvement in language and reading development throughout the years of schooling." This was further strengthened in the Swan report of 1985. This was called Education for All, which said that unless there is a school language and learning policy across the curriculum, there will be a wastage of effort and often confusion. In the decades following these national reports, the concept of language across the curriculum evolved and even underwent some change. However, the basic premise on which it rests has remained the same. This is the importance has remained the same. That is, the importance of language in and for school education, its centrality in learning different subjects and across the entire curriculum. Language across the curriculum is something that happens continuously in classrooms, in our homes and even on the playgrounds, whether we wish it or not, and that most learning cannot happen without it. We as teachers or students may not be conscious of this experience. Let us now talk about certain characteristics of language and language across the curriculum. First, language develops mainly by using it purposefully. The language across the curriculum also draws upon what was known as the content-based instruction movement of the 1990s. Briefly, when language is used and learnt for a purpose, it is learnt better. The LAC approach integrates content learning with language learning. It acknowledges the fact that language education takes place not only in the language class but in the class of every other subject also. We need to understand that each subject has language similar to other subjects as well as its own language usage and style, what is known as jargon. For example, the word cell, C-E-L-L, has different meanings in a history class where it means a prison cell or a dungeon, or a biology class where it is seen as the smallest unit of an organism, or an ICT class where we talk about cell phones as synonyms of mobile phones. When we plot a graph on the graph papers, we do talk about cells. Similarly, each subject has its own vocabulary and writing genres. For example, science report writing is going to be markedly different from a history report writing. So, in other words, content subjects provide a context for language, while command over the language helps in learning the content subjects. An interesting activity we as teachers can do and subsequently make our learners do is collect words which mean different concepts in different subjects. Like the word interest has different meaning in mathematics, in English and in commerce. Or the word square in maths and English has different meanings. Or the word battery in physics means differently, and in psychology it means a battery. When we say a battery of tests, we mean a group of tests. There are innumerable examples. For instance, the word property has different meaning when we talk about property as an asset in a commerce class, or the chemical property of a substance in a chemistry class. Or there are two words, place and value. They have certain meanings in English, but when these words are used together as place value in mathematics, it has different connotations, etc. Coming back to the characteristics of language, the next characteristic is that learning often takes place during talking, writing, or giving shape to things, or even through movement. There is a need for language across the curriculum approach because research has proved that language is best learnt through active involvement in meaning making of the subject content, which of course is dependent on language. It assumes that both content and language are interrelated. Whatever the subject the students are learning, they assimilate new knowledge only through language. When students discuss, talk, or listen to, or write in non-linguistic classes, they use language. So while learning concepts in subjects other than languages, they inadvertently enhance their linguistic skills as well. Next, language use is an integral part of cognitive development. This approach stresses that language and learning are interlinked. So in order to develop and enhance the existing cognitive and language capacities of the learners, the LAC approach encourages active, participative, constructive and potentially autonomous learning. The relationship between cognition and language is the cornerstone of LAC approach, which is supported by researches in cognitive science as well as linguistics and language pedagogy. We all learn in a language. So if our language is weak, our resultant learning will also be inadequate. Next, language is the medium through which we reflect on our learning and improve it. Needless to say, good teachers are reflective practitioners. We reflect on what was good about our teaching today and what can be improved. We reflect on our bright students and those who need more help, or even those who do not like our subjects. And for these two last categories, we need to plan better teaching and learning strategies and develop accordingly. As our language and command over other subjects develops, we realize that we use language to reflect upon our own learning, assess our performance and proficiency levels and improve them. All reflection happens in a language, each shaping the other and in turn being shaped by it. Finally, language helps us to become autonomous learners. This is the situation where we become independent learners responsible for our own learning trajectory. Autonomous learners decide on their academic or professional requirements or preferences and they work accordingly. Remember, we need a language to do all this. The National Council for Teacher Education, in its document, the National Curriculum Framework for Teacher Education 2009, gave the LAC approach a much needed inclusion in teacher preparation programs. It said, language cuts across the entire school curriculum and hence the role of language as a medium and as a tool of communication assumes great importance. A teacher does many roles in the classroom. A teacher talks, explains, narrates, asks questions, illustrates with examples, guides the students, instructs them, motivates and encourages them and plays various other roles. All these imply an appropriate and context-specific use of language. Concepts, constructs, examples are the building blocks of knowledge and all these are language based. This makes the teacher's language proficiency and communication skills per se critical factors in school education apart from her own sound knowledge base of pedagogical and other professional capacities. The goal of language across the curriculum are, to put it simply, to support language development in every child, in every form of language use and in each and every activity of the school. LAC is not seen narrowly as being limited to the first language or the language of the school or the second or the third languages. And it also goes beyond the 4 language skills to include all non-verbal ways of communicating accessible to us. These include everything from images, visuals, graphs, movements, or what are known as the physical forms of perception and expression. According to Corson, there are 8 modes of human activity involving language. First, listening. Listening is comprehending the oral inputs that we get. Listening is a basic communicative skill. There is a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is an ability and listening is the skill. However we look at it, whether we hear or we listen, we use language. The next is speaking. And what is speaking? Speaking is constructing meaningful utterances. It goes without saying that speech is how language is used most of the times. We need to harness our language abilities to be able to construct meaningful and coherent utterances. The third one is reading. And what is reading? Reading is understanding written texts. Reading is a psychological process where we don't just decipher the written text, we understand and comprehend and also respond to it. We need to read geography or physics to comprehend the concepts of, say, flash floods or buoyancy. So when reading is combined with writing and reflecting, it results in better learning. Many times, the difficulty in solving word problems in mathematics has to do with inadequate reading comprehension. The fourth human activity is writing, where we produce written texts or a discourse. Language always helps to give shape to discourse and realize the functions of each discourse. We use language to support mental activities and develop precise thinking, which is useful for subject-based writing. The next human activity is viewing. Viewing is attending to expressions or visual sounds. For instance, when we study graphs or tables, we are comprehending the visual graphic mode of language to understand the text. Next, shaping. Shaping is using visual means of expression like drawing, preparing slides, looking at the sky and understanding the weather conditions are examples of using visual means of expression. Then we have watching. Watching is attending to movements. Following a tennis or a football or a cricket match on the television is an example, or seeing a dance recital is linked to non-verbal language usage. However, comprehending these events requires language. We understand through a language. Finally, moving, where we use the whole body, the total physical response. Dance is a form of communication. Being so, it is another aspect of language usage. One very important component of all these 8 activities is the use of cognition or thinking. Language use is a psychological activity and hence effective discharge of these actions involves thinking, understanding, comprehending, constructing and producing language. Language is linked to the thinking process and language is used to think. Language can be said to be a tool for thinking and giving form to content-based and procedure-related thoughts. Teachers must encourage their students to read extensively, write and also speak in all aspects of their subject areas. Language is naturally and obviously present in all areas of learning. It is for the teacher to use every possible opportunity the curriculum offers and further generate opportunities to develop language skills of their students in their subject. To sum up, we have tried to define language across the curriculum approach. In all school subjects, different skills, knowledge and values are gained or learnt through language. In all learning processes of all subjects, students speak, read and write, as also listen to the subject matter. Studying any subject introduces us to newer concepts and phenomenon and thus adds to our understanding and knowledge of that subject. For all this, it is important for learners to have command over the language specific to each subject as well as overall language competence. This is using language across the curriculum. We also talked about assumptions underlying this approach. Subject learning and language learning happen simultaneously and each is important for the other. Language across the curriculum approach to learning emphasizes the need to improve command over language in all subjects so that it results in better learning outcomes. The need for this approach is integral with the need to improve learner performance. Those of us whose command over language is good or even satisfactory do well academically. This is because research has proved beyond doubt the deep relationship between cognition and language. We also talked about the 8 modes of human activity which require language, and finally the importance of the teacher in developing and enhancing the linguistic capacities of the students in their specific subjects by adopting the language across the curriculum approach. Finally, I wish to pose certain questions for you to think over and answer for yourselves. First, can you think of 2 or 3 strategies to include LAC approach in your subject? And if you are a language teacher, is this approach relevant for you? How and why? Second, what possible problems can you visualize in implementing this approach and how will you overcome them? See, the point is not whether or not to have this approach. Now the strategy is to use this approach, we just have to work out how. Third and finally, of the various characteristics of language across the curriculum discussed today, how many can you relate to your class and your students? Thank you so much.